For 20 years, almost nobody outside the drug world knew his name. While his brother partied under every camera flash in Atlanta, Terry Flenory stayed in the background, running hundreds of kilos of cocaine a month directly to Mexican cartel suppliers. He once handed $2 million in jewelry to a stranger's associate, not knowing who the buyer really was, until a phone call in Spanish thanked him personally. That invisibility is the story. This is how a quiet man from Southwest Detroit helped build one of the largest cocaine operations in American history without anyone noticing until they did. And everything all started when someone needed jewelry for a group of men back in Mexico who didn't speak English and didn't waste time. Flenory pulled together roughly $2 million in pieces out of New York, sourced through the celebrity jeweler known across hip-hop as Jacob the Jeweler. The buyers were stunned that he could produce that much product that fast, so a few days later, someone called to thank him personally in Spanish. That voice belonged to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the head of the Sinaloa Cartel. But that contact was not by accident. It was built over almost 2 decades, brick by brick, by two brothers from a city that was falling apart around them. Terry Lee Flenory was born January 10, 1970 in Detroit, Michigan, the younger brother of Demetrius Big Meech Flenory by 2 years. Their parents, Charles and Lucille Flenory, held down real jobs and tried to build something stable. Charles worked as a carpenter and played music on the side. Lucille eventually became the head of a Detroit nonprofit. Inside the house, there was structure. Outside it, Southwest Detroit was collapsing under the weight of deindustrialization, poverty, and the crack epidemic tearing through the city in the 1980s. The brothers started selling narcotics as teenagers, dealing $50 bags of cocaine on the streets of Detroit during their high school years in the late 1980s. The shift from powder to crack came when they watched other dealers cooking and packaging product into $50 packs, and Terry came up with the idea to prepare the packs in advance and sell them larger. Within about a week, they had $10,000 worth of crack broken into $50 packages. The name stuck. People started calling them the 50 Boys. The money did something to both of them, but it did something different to each. Meech was a big dreamer who wanted everything he saw: chains, rings, tracksuits. For Terry, the money meant something quieter, a version of self-respect he'd never had access to before. Neither of them yet understood what the product they were selling was about to do to their own community. Detroit in that period was flooded with cautionary tales and celebrated outlaws in equal measure. Street names like Maserati Rick, Butch Jones, and Ed Hansard were already legendary by the time the Flenory brothers were teenagers, and those names shaped what looked possible. The brothers ran with the Puritan Avenue crew known as the PA Boys, and although they weren't official members, the heat that followed that group followed them too. Several of the PA Boys were already known to federal investigators, which meant Meech, in particular, was flagged by law enforcement earlier than he realized. Business scaled fast. What started as street corner packs turned into kilo weight, then multiple kilos a week. Before the decade ended, Meech made his first trip to Atlanta, a city that would eventually become the operation's second capital. Back home, the brothers understood that real growth meant cutting out the local suppliers they'd been buying from and finding a direct line to the source. That meant going west. In California, they connected with a trafficker named Wayne Joyner, who linked them to Mexican cartel suppliers directly. Removing the middlemen meant higher margins, fewer leaks, and less risk of anyone talking. To move the money without drawing attention, Terry started a taxi company seeded with settlement funds from a malpractice lawsuit tied to a botched surgery. On the surface, it looked like a legitimate small business. Underneath, it functioned as a laundering channel for drug proceeds. Law enforcement was never far behind, even in these early years. In 1994, Meach and a Colombian associate were arrested on drug charges, though the case collapsed for lack of evidence. It wasn't a conviction, but it was a signal that federal attention had already started to build. That same period brought Terry the closest he'd come to dying, in an incident known only through his own retelling. He was getting into his car one night when a man approached with a pistol and pressed it to his temple. Terry slapped the gun away as it fired, and the bullet struck him just under the eye. The man checked to see if he was dead, and when Terry moved, a struggle broke out before the shooter fled. Terry went home first, tried to rinse the blood himself, and refused to go to the hospital until his brother arrived. When police showed up at the hospital, they arrived with automatic weapons in tow, treating the scene as a potential retaliation zone. A doctor later told him the gunshot had left glass in his eye and caused permanent retinal damage. That injury and the violence behind it became part of why he stayed further out of the spotlight for the rest of his career in the business. His brother stayed visible. Terry didn't. By the mid-1990s, the organization had outgrown Detroit entirely. It had people operating in Kentucky, Georgia, Missouri, Texas, and California. Atlanta became the biggest prize of all. A wave of federal cases had recently wiped out the Miami-based traffickers who once controlled the city's cocaine trade, leaving a vacuum. Meach moved to Atlanta to run the southern side of the business personally, building relationships with local distributors and locking down supply. The seizures started stacking almost immediately. In October 1996, undercover agents took $300,000 in a Michigan sting connected to the crew. Days later, federal agents seized another $4 million in Detroit, and on the same day, police in California recovered more than $576,000 from Terry's longtime girlfriend. Georgia police took $143,000 from an associate believed to be a key distributor the following year. By 1999, Texas officers had seized 18 kilos of cocaine from workers tied to the organization, and police in Beaumont grabbed over $424,000 while arresting a close associate. None of it stopped the operation. It only confirmed how large it had become. By 2000, Terry relocated permanently to Los Angeles to sit closer to the cartel supply lines coming up from Mexico. From that point forward, the organization ran on two heads. Meach controlled the South out of Atlanta. Terry controlled the West out of Los Angeles. The organization operated from two main hubs, one in Atlanta for distribution run by Demetrius, and one in Los Angeles to handle incoming shipments from Mexico run by Terry. It was during this era that the name Black Mafia family took hold, an acronym that happened to double as Demetrius's own initials. The seizures didn't slow the growth. 17 kilos were taken in Arizona in late 2000. 9 more were seized in Kansas City in early 2001. At its peak, the organization had grown to over 500 members, operating across 11 states, including Georgia, Florida, New York, and California. The reason they were able to take over so many markets at once was straightforward. They had the cheapest, purest product on the street, buying directly from cartel sources at roughly $9,000 a kilo and reselling at $17,000, undercutting nearly everyone while still pulling enormous margins. Investigators later estimated the organization was moving around 600 kilos of cocaine every single month at its height. The product itself became a kind of brand name on the street, sold under the label Hummer, prized for running around 90% pure at a time when most street cocaine was heavily cut. Terry has described the operation in strikingly ordinary terms. For something that size, comparing it to a delivery service, the goal was simply to get product to the customer's door faster and cheaper than anyone else could, and the organization wrote this record for moving the most drugs, a track record that made cartel suppliers comfortable sending larger and larger shipments without hesitation. For most of that run, almost nobody outside the business knew who he was. For years, nobody never heard of me, he said of that period. I was a ghost. That anonymity wasn't incidental. It was the entire operating model on the Los Angeles side of the business, and it was the reason Terry's name stayed out of the papers years after his brothers had already become impossible to avoid. By 2003, the organization stopped being a quiet power and became a headline. Once that happened, there was no going back to operating unnoticed. The warning signs came early in the year. On January 26th, a Texas state trooper pulled over 2 couriers connected to the organization in Gray County, and a search of their vehicle turned up over $700,000 in cash. Both men were arrested for money laundering, and investigators now had a direct thread running back to Detroit. By August, police in Arkansas had seized 27 more kilos from another associate. Then came the moment that pulled the operation into public view for good. On September 7, 2 men attempted to rob the townhouse of William Doc Marshall, described as the organization's money manager. The robbery turned violent, shots were fired, and one intruder was hit. When police arrived, they found more than a botched robbery. Inside the house was a kilo of cocaine and a large empty safe. That single call gave Atlanta investigators a direct look into how deep the operation actually ran. By late October, federal agencies stopped playing defense. On October 28, 2003, the DEA and federal prosecutors launched a formal coordinated investigation codenamed Operation Motor City Mafia, backed by the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. This wasn't a routine case anymore. It was a mission built specifically to dismantle the entire structure. 2 weeks later, everything changed at once. On November 11, Demetrius Flenory was involved in a shooting outside a now-closed Atlanta club called Club Chaos, which left Anthony Wolf Jones, a former bodyguard for Sean Combs, and Jones's friend Lamont Riz Gertie dead. Demetrius himself was shot and has maintained a claim never tested at trial that he was running from the gunfire rather than participating in it. Wolf Jones was close to both brothers personally. Terry has described him as like a brother and said he'd been supplying Wolf with 5 or 6 kilos at a time before the shooting happened. Learning what had occurred, Terry's first thought wasn't only about the loss. It was the certainty that the attention it would bring meant prison was now only a matter of time. Demetrius was never indicted in connection with the shooting due to a lack of witnesses and evidence. But the attention it generated was immediate and enormous. His face and the organization's name were suddenly everywhere in the media. Atlanta even moved its club closing time from 4 a.m. to 2 a.m. in the aftermath. Just 6 days later, on November 17th, federal prosecutors indicted 8 figures connected to the old Puritan Avenue network, tightening the circle around the organization's earliest roots. That pressure didn't just hit the business, it hit the relationship between the brothers directly. By 2004, Wiretaps had picked up Terry, telling an associate that he and his brother weren't even speaking, and that Demetrius had lost control of himself. In another intercepted call, Terry vented that Demetrius was letting people get into his head without even understanding why he was angry. Terry had always operated quietly, moving clean and staying invisible. In his eyes, his brother's growing visibility, the club appearances, the flashy lifestyle, the media attention was putting a target on an operation that depended on staying out of sight. After the 2003 shooting, the tension turned into an outright split. The organization didn't just argue internally, it divided into two separate chains of command, still operating under the same name, but no longer functioning as one entity. Rather than pulling back, Demetrius accelerated. In March 2005, he made his first serious move toward legitimacy by launching BMF Entertainment, a hip-hop promotion, company, and record label, alongside a lifestyle magazine called The Juice. On paper, it looked like a music business. Investigators believed it functioned as part promotional vehicle, part money laundering channel, and part long-term exit plan from the drug trade. The magazine launched with two covers, one featuring Demetrius as executive editor, the other featuring a rising Atlanta rapper closely tied to the organization, Young Jeezy. BMF Entertainment's official artist was a rapper named Blue Da Vinci, but the brand's reach extended much further than one act. Demetrius financed big-budget videos, paid DJs to spin records, and put up billboards across Atlanta. It was loud, and it was impossible to miss, which was exactly the problem. While the music side made noise, the investigation kept tightening in silence. In March and April 2005, state troopers began hitting couriers with traffic stops that weren't random at all, recovering as much as 100 kilos of cocaine in a single vehicle in some cases, and $500,000 in cash in others. In April, an arrest connected the organization directly to Atlanta's political establishment when Tremaine "Kiki" Graham was taken into custody on trafficking charges. Graham was the son-in-law of the city's sitting mayor, which guaranteed the case attention at the highest levels. By spring, a formal task force had come together combining the DEA, ATF, Atlanta police, and federal prosecutors, and for the first time, they secured court approval to listen in directly. Demetrius stayed largely off the phones. Terry didn't. Over 1,000 of his calls were eventually intercepted, and prosecutors would later have roughly 900 pages of transcribed wiretap conversation from Terry's phone alone, gathered over a 5-month period. In May 2004, a judge signed off on the wiretap targeting Terry's line, and agents began hearing everything: calls about moving weight, calls about pricing, calls about where and when product needed to move. On June 17th, a courier heading toward Louisville was pulled over, and police found 10 kilos of cocaine in the vehicle. More significant than the drugs was the phone. A recent call in the log connected to a contact whose number matched a man agents already had on Terry's tapped line. That connection led investigators from Detroit to Louisville and back, resulting in a second wiretap approved on that associate's phone. The evidence accumulated fast: recorded conversations about distribution, a confidential informant confirming prior cocaine purchases, and eventually a search that turned up scales, ledgers, and branded packaging tied directly to the organization. Later trial testimony laid out exactly how the Atlanta side of the business functioned day to day. The organization ran roughly 5 stash houses in the Atlanta area, and roughly every 10 days, vehicles would arrive carrying 100 to 150 kilograms of cocaine packed into secret compartments. Workers stationed at the houses were paid specifically to unload and store the product. Customers placed orders by phone, confirmed they had a vehicle ready to receive the shipment, and were directed to a specific stash house where they handed over cash in $5,000 bundles before the cocaine, typically priced around $20,000 per kilogram, was loaded in. The same vehicles were then packed with cash proceeds and sent back toward the Mexican suppliers. Some shipments arrived a different way entirely, moving through large containers at the airport before being distributed to the stash houses. It was less a street operation at that point than a logistics company that happened to move cocaine instead of freight. The lifestyle funded by that logistics network extended well beyond Atlanta. At one point, The brothers were guests at a party thrown by a member of Morocco's royal family, flying roughly 400 people overseas for the occasion. Wolf Jones and Demetrius spent much of that trip together, one more data point in how tightly the organization's inner circle and its social world had merged by that stage. The violence never slowed down while the case built. On July 25, 2004, a mid-level clash outside a Midtown Atlanta club called the Velvet Room ended with the killing of Rashanable Prince Drummond. According to later trial testimony, the confrontation began after a near collision between vehicles escalated into a physical fight and ended when a top-ranking organization member allegedly retrieved a weapon and shot Drummond after an initial warning shot had already been fired by someone in Drummond's group. That September, a federal witness named Ulysses Hackett and his girlfriend, Misty Carter, were murdered inside her Atlanta apartment. Investigators alleged the killing was ordered because Hackett was considering testifying against the organization, though that allegation was never proven at trial against everyone accused of ordering it. By 2005, the organization's collision with celebrity culture had become impossible to separate from the criminal case itself. On May 10th, rising Atlanta rapper Radrick Davis, known as Gucci Mane, was involved in a fatal shooting during an attempted home invasion. One of the attackers, Henry Pookie Lock Clark, was killed, and Gucci Mane was initially charged with murder before the charges were dropped on grounds of self-defense. His legal team alleged the attackers had been sent because of tension between Gucci Mane and Young Jeezy, an organization associate, though that claim was never proven in court. Federal agents from the ATF, DEA, and FBI all questioned the Gucci Mane in connection with the incident. Less than 2 weeks later, another violent incident tied the organization to a different corner of celebrity life. At a birthday party held at a restaurant owned by Sean Combs, an argument escalated into a stabbing that left two of R&B singer Bobby Brown's nephews injured with an ice pick. Witnesses alleged the attacker was a younger brother of the organization's signed rapper and that the group fled the scene alongside another well-known Atlanta rapper. One suspect's charges were dropped after witnesses declined to cooperate, and the other suspect was killed in an unrelated incident before the case ever reached trial. Then, on July 11, 2005, Terry Flenory was pulled over during what began as a routine traffic stop in Illinois. Troopers searched the vehicle and found jewelry worth nearly $5 million, including watches from Rolex, Audemars, Piguet, and a rare white gold Piaget piece. He was reportedly en route to deliver the pieces to Young Jeezy for a photo shoot. That single stop opened a full money laundering investigation that reached directly into the music industry, eventually pulling in names like producer Damon Thomas and celebrity jeweler Jacob Arabo, better known as Jacob the Jeweler. By the end of 2005, Operation Motor City Mafia was closing in, and the arrests came fast. Omari O-Dog McCree, a high-level distributor, pleaded guilty after months of surveillance, began cooperating, then stopped. The judge showed no leniency, and he was sentenced to 15 years. Then federal agents went for the brothers directly. Demetrius was arrested at a rented home outside Dallas, Texas on October 20, 2005, and Terry was arrested a week later at a home outside St. Louis, along with several associates. Demetrius was released on bond under strict conditions, placed on house arrest under his mother's supervision while awaiting trial. As more arrests followed, the scale of the case became undeniable. Federal agencies, state police, and prosecutors across multiple states had all been working the same investigation. By late October, roughly 30 members and associates were taken into custody in the primary raid. with the DEA seizing millions in cash and assets, and the number of people ultimately charged in the case would climb toward 150 over the following years. The Jacob the Jeweler case moved on its own track. In June 2006, Jacob Arabov was charged in a 13-count indictment accusing him of conspiring to launder monetary instruments connected to the organization's cocaine profits. Prosecutors alleged he had helped disguise ownership of jewelry purchased with drug proceeds. Arabov ultimately pleaded guilty to falsifying records and making false statements to a federal agent, with the underlying money laundering charges dropped as part of the plea deal, and was sentenced to roughly 2.5 years in prison, along with a $2 million forfeiture payment. By 2007, the case against the brothers themselves had fully matured. The indictment ultimately named around 150 people connected to the organization, but the heaviest weight landed on Demetrius and Terry specifically. Both were charged under the Continuing Criminal Enterprise statute, the federal government's version of a kingpin charge, a designation that typically comes with a mandatory life sentence if a conviction follows a trial. Terry faced 11 counts total, including the kingpin charge, multiple drug conspiracy counts, charges tied to using phones to arrange deals, and money laundering. Demetrius faced 6 counts covering the criminal enterprise charge, cocaine conspiracy, and laundering. Demetrius, notably, had never been caught on a wiretap and didn't face the same weight of witness testimony that Terry did, but the risk of trial was total. A loss meant life without parole rather than a fixed term. On November 29, 2007, both brothers pleaded guilty in federal court in Detroit to running a continuing criminal enterprise. By September 2008, both were sentenced to 30 years in federal prison for operating a nationwide cocaine trafficking ring that, by the government's account, generated more than $270 million. The forfeiture matched the scale of the case. Investigators seized more than 30 pieces of jewelry, 13 residences across Detroit, Georgia, and Los Angeles, and 35 vehicles, including a customized Lincoln Navigator limousine fitted with hidden compartments that had once been used to move both cocaine and cash across state lines. Investigators searching that same limousine at one point found $580,250 hidden inside its secret compartments. The most visible symbol of the operation's wealth was Demetrius's white Maybach 62, reportedly the only one of its kind in the country at the time, worth roughly $430,000. What made the case even more striking to investigators was that by the time it collapsed, the brothers were barely functioning as a single organization anymore. They had split years earlier into separate chains of command, running parallel operations under one name. The prosecuting agent in charge, addressing the sentencing publicly, called the organization a violent, sophisticated smuggling and laundering operation that had grown from a small local hustle into a multi-state, multi-million-dollar enterprise with direct ties to Mexican cartels. For both brothers, 2008 marked the first time either of them had ever actually been incarcerated, after roughly 20 years of running an operation that had touched drug trafficking, the music industry, and pockets of celebrity culture all at once. Rappers, including Young Jeezy, T.I.'s, and Fabulous, had all seen early career support tied to the organization's promotional muscle, though not everyone connected to that ecosystem stayed unscathed. Behind the scenes, the organization had spent years storing product and cash inside large suburban mansions used as stash houses, often located in wealthy gated neighborhoods, precisely because police presence there stood out more than the criminal activity did. Investigators found several of the properties carried informal nicknames among the crew, among them the White House, the Gate, the elevator, and the horse ranch. Terry's longtime girlfriend, Tonisa Welch, was tied to one of those properties on paper and received a 5-year sentence for money laundering as a result. Prison did not move at the same pace for both brothers. In May 2020, Terry was released to home confinement due to the COVID-19 pandemic and underlying health concerns, part of a broader federal effort to reduce prison populations during the outbreak. Demetrius sought the same relief and was denied. A federal judge rejected his request, citing his continued self-promotion as a drug kingpin from inside prison and disciplinary violations that included possession of a cell phone and weapons, as well as drug use. In 2021, Terry was reportedly shot in Detroit during a dispute connected to the street world, suffering a serious eye injury, though the circumstances were never fully confirmed publicly. Demetrius, meanwhile, continued working toward release through other channels. He earned his GED behind bars, maintained program eligibility, and in October 2024 was transferred to a halfway house in Miami ahead of a scheduled release, placed under supervised release restrictions for several years afterward. The final turn in Terry's case came at the end of that same year. On December 12, 2024, President Joe Biden commuted Terry Flenory's remaining sentence as part of a broader clemency initiative aimed at people who had served years on home confinement, an action that affected roughly 1,500 people nationwide. Terry marked the moment publicly, posting a video of himself removing his ankle monitor. It's been a journey, but prayer and unwavering faith beyond mere human comprehension got us to this point, he said in the post announcing his release. Looking back on the run itself, Terry has been careful about the language he uses. He avoids the word regret, preferring to call what he feels remorse instead, distinguishing between wishing something never happened and wishing it had gone differently. He has pointed out that the version of the story that shows up in music leaves out the losses that came with it, the friends who didn't survive, the years that didn't come back. Asked whether the money was worth what it cost, his answer, in his own words, was no. He has also been direct about where he places responsibility. Asked whether he played a part in what happened, Terry's answer has simply been yes. He has said he wants to use what he went through to speak to younger people still living inside that same world, encouraging them toward what he calls valuing family and valuing freedom instead. In the end, we're choosing a new way of life, he has said, of where he and his brother stand now. The organization he helped build eventually became a television series, a pop culture reference point, and a permanent fixture in hip-hop's history of the mid-2000s. But Terry Flenory's own account of it keeps returning to the same idea, that staying quiet, staying out of the spotlight his brother chased so openly was never really a strategy. It was survival. It just wasn't enough to keep the walls from closing in eventually. What began as $50 packs on a Detroit street corner ended as a 9-figure case study in how far invisibility can carry a person and exactly where it runs out.